Tonight on Nation to Nation, Australians are set to vote October 14th on whether Indigenous people should be included in their constitution. Polls already suggest it won't happen.
I think it would certainly be a sense of rejection if Australia chooses not to recognise us in the Constitution.
Wolastoqey chiefs in New Brunswick accuse the province's premier of fear-mongering when it comes to their land claim.
So I want to be very clear. The only forest land that we are acquiring is that land that was given to forestry companies.
And a look at Wab Kinew's government and its priorities, which includes a search at the Prairie Green landfill.
That has been one of the top things that we've been talking about. No one should ever have to, call the landfill their final resting place.
Ani, hello, I'm Annette Francis, and welcome to Nation to Nation. Indigenous people in Canada have rights enshrined in the Constitution, most notably under Section 35. But in Australia, there is no mention of Indigenous people in the Australian Constitution. That may change as Australians get ready to vote in a referendum on Saturday. A yes vote would recognize that country's first peoples in their constitution and create an advisory body to their parliament. To explain what is happening down under, we're joined by Natalie Amat, news presenter for Australia's Indigenous Network, NITV. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you for having me.
Why is Australia having this referendum?
This effectively goes back to about 2017 when a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives from right across the country, remote, regional and urban communities, came together and developed a document known as the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which identified how we as First Nations groups and communities across the country wanted to be recognised in the Constitution, in the nation's birth certificate. And the three central pillars of the Uluru Statement were voice, treaty and truth. So this referendum that we're having on Saturday is to see if Australia supports a voice to Parliament, an advisory body to government to be enshrined in the Constitution of Australia.
Okay, so how did the latest push get there for the referendum?
Well, when the new Labor government was voted into power last year, our new Prime Minister, or he's not so new anymore, but the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, promised as one of the first things that he wanted to achieve as Prime Minister was enshrining those three pillars, voice, treaty and truth, as set out in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So voice was the first of those pillars. So he has called this referendum. So August last year, he announced the proposed wording, and ever since we've been working towards this moment where we go to the polls and Australia decides. I'm not sure what the situation is in your country, but here in Australia, in order to change the Constitution, it needs to be decided by the people through a referendum. So that's the process that we're going into this Saturday the 14th.
In my intro, I mentioned an advisory body would be created if there is a yes vote. It's sometimes called just The Voice, not to confuse it with the singing show, but what would The Voice do?
There's been a bit of confusion with some voters.
So what would The Voice do?
Look, it would be purely an advisory body to government. It would be drawn from, as I said, communities right across the country, making sure we've got that representation of remote, regional and urban voices. So, but purely an advisory body that would have be able to have a direct line to government and the executive office to advise on matters affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities in this country. So we want it the people that are advocating for The Voice want it enshrined in the Constitution so it can never be gotten rid of by the government's of the day. So that's, I guess, what would set the Voice to Parliament apart from other advisory bodies that have existed in Australia in the past. But yeah, just basically, it's an advisory body. It wouldn't actually have the power to make laws or change laws. That would still be up to our parliamentarians here in Australia. But it would give Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander a seat at that table and a direct say in matters affecting our peoples right across this country.
Would Indigenous people in Australia gain any rights through a yes vote similar to ones in Canada?
Look, it's an advisory body more so than a rights body, but I guess central to Indigenous rights is that right to be heard and that right to have a say. So while it's not a rights body per se, it would be an advisory body. It would, of course, give Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander the right to participate in decisions that affect them, and also to advocate for improved human rights in all sorts of areas like health, education, housing, employment programs. So it would certainly sort of be rights would be central to the work that the Voice would do should Australia decide to vote yes this coming weekend.
Recent polls have shown the no side ahead. How disappointing would a loss be?
Oh, look, I think it would be hugely disappointing for those, especially, you know, we've seen a lot of people that have campaigned for quite a long time now on this, and I'm sure it will be a real blow if it is a no vote, as the polls are suggesting. I think it would feel like a sense of rejection to many people. The surveys have shown 83% of Indigenous Australians do support the Voice. So again, you know, not all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people agree it's the best way forward, but certainly surveys suggest that a majority of the communities do. So I think it would certainly be a sense of rejection if Australia chooses not to recognise us in the Constitution through a Voice to Parliament. But having said that, we don't currently have a Voice to Parliament, so we wouldn't lose anything. Where, as some people have put it, we're already living in the no. It would just be a continuation of the status quo. So while that would be very disappointing, we're not it's not like something's been taken away from us. And like Indigenous peoples right around the world, this wouldn't be the end for us if it was a no vote. Everyone here would continue fighting as we have for recognition and our rights. So you know, yes, it would be a blow. There would be a healing process, I think, that would need to go underway in this country, should that be the result come Saturday night or Sunday morning. But you know, the fight would continue regardless of whether we have a Voice to Parliament or we don't in the future here in Australia.
Okay, thank you for that. Miigwech, thank you for taking the time. We'll be watching.
Thank you very much. Great to speak to you.
After the break, we'll find out why First Nations in the province of New Brunswick are unhappy with the overhaul of Indigenous affairs there. Honey, welcome back. To say the Wolastoqey Nation is upset with the province of New Brunswick would be a bit of an understatement. Leaders recently sent an open letter to Brian Higgs' government, slamming it for an overhaul of the Department of Indigenous Affairs. They also accuse the province of fear-mongering, as a huge land claim filed in 2020 makes its way through the courts. To talk about this, we're joined by Chief Alan Polchis Jr. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you, Waleed, for having me.
What was it about the overhaul of New Brunswick Department of Indigenous Affairs the Wolastoqey chiefs object to?
Well, the New Brunswick government centralizes all negotiations with Indigenous people into Aboriginal Affairs Department. That answers only to the Premier of New Brunswick, and the Premier currently is Blaine Higgs. And of course, his expensive lawyers that he hires that oversees any transition. So any negotiation is being done with one person, and of course, that person is making all the decisions, which is the Premier.
So Indigenous Affairs Minister Arlene Dunn says she and Premier Higgs have met with Wolastoqey First Nations many times. Why hasn't that resulted in a better relationship?
Well, our relationships with, of course, Minister Dunn and the Premier are separate. As the Wolastoqey chief, the last time I met with both of them was well over a year ago. I've seen Minister Dunn in passing. The situation with, of course, the government here in New Brunswick, and it goes with all the departments. I'm not really sure why they have ministers, because of course they just sit at a cabinet table with the Premier just making all the decisions themselves. And of course, if they go against the Premier, we all know what happens in the cabinet room is that they get ousted. And that is the situation, unfortunately, here in New Brunswick.
What was your relationship like with the previous provincial government?
Well, the previous provincial government was Liberal. And of course, you know, there's always challenges. There's been a history of challenges within the province of New Brunswick. There's 15 First Nation communities that make up this province. 9 of them are Mi'kmaq, 6 of them are Wolastoqey. The relationship with the government, the previous government, was a path forward. With this current government, it's taken 2 steps back because, of course, this government has taken away our tax agreements. They look at it, the justice system, they've given no justice to our people that ask for justice when our members are being murdered or missing. So, you know, the challenges are just not to our favor.
Why do you think it has changed so much with this government?
Well, I'd have to say the understanding and education. The current Premier does not understand the Indian Act, for one, nor does he not understand or want to take time to understand our culture. And when we're sitting at tables talking to him, we're trying to educate him and share so he understands. It amazes me when he's surprised when we tell him, you know, how communities work and how we do our business. And, you know, it's as we're very close knit here in our communities, he thinks that, you know, we're just like any mainstream society, which we're not.
There has also been accusations of fear-mongering by the province in regards to your land claim, that you're coming after private property. What has been Higgs government's response to your point that it's not true?
Well, again, this is the title case, and the Premier continues to use the term land claim, thinking that, you know, the First Nations are going to take all the land from existing New Brunswickers, which is not the case. This is the title case. If you own the land, that is your land. Of course, we're going to honor that. So I want to be very clear. The only forest land that we are acquiring is that land that was given to like forestry companies that, of course, taken that natural resources away from us. But a personal home owner, land owner, farm owner, we will be not seeking that. They can, of course, keep that. The Premier is fear-mongering because he's trying to turn New Brunswickers on the First Nations.
Wolastoqey leadership says they look forward to working with the new government, although an election hasn't even happened or isn't happening. Can the relationship with this Premier and his government be repaired at this point?
Well, it's been a very sour road, if I may. You know, the letter is not an endorsement of any one particular party. We want whoever is in government to understand that the consultation is the constitutional requirement and is the legal protected right. So we're willing to work with them. It's just we need to have the government to put us in their plan. You know, here in New Brunswick, for example, their health plan, there is no mention of any First Nations plan in their health plan, which is of course really concerning considering all the challenges that we have.
Has there been a response at all from Premier Higgs in regards to that open letter?
No, we haven't received any response yet. You know, in passing, I run into ministers here because I'm in an urban community. I live right here in Sedunk, is right here in Fredericton, you know, and they don't even mention it. Some of the ministers, of course, want to have that relationship, but again, it's all led by the Premier of New Brunswick, which of course is Blaine Higgs. His own party, majority of his own party want him gone as a leader. So what does that say? And the challenge is, the First Nations becomes the bottom of the barrel in terms of any type of negotiation or even to reach out to.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you for joining us, Chief. Coming up, we'll hear from a Manitoba NDP MLA on the eve of becoming government. Welcome back. Bernadette Smith became an NDP member of Manitoba's legislature in 2017, with all those years spent in opposition. But that all changed last week when Wab Kinew won a historic majority government. Before all that, Smith was co-founder of the Manitoba Coalition of Families of Missing and Murdered Women, as well as the Drag the Red River initiative. Bernadette Smith joins us now. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you for having me.
Bernadette, where were you when the election results came in? What was your response?
I was down at the Hotel Fort Garry along with a lot of the other incumbent MLAs with a bunch of Manitobans, and I was super emotional, like a lot of the folks that were there. You know, of course, we were wishing for the best outcome. Manitobans were really tired of, 7 years of cuts, and we certainly seen, the impacts that it had on our city and certainly on our province. And you certainly saw the hope that it brought that night, and people just felt the shift, and you saw the numbers coming in and just the hope that people felt, as you started to see those double digits going into the 20s and then soon into the 30s.
What does this NDP majority win mean for Indigenous people in Manitoba as a whole?
Well, it certainly brings a lot of hope, and I think, people start to see themselves reflected, and that's something that, growing up in the north end of Winnipeg and a lot of folks that live in, rural communities, certainly in First Nation communities, start to see themselves as, future leaders, future politicians, future people who can be sitting in that Manitoba legislature. As someone who grew up in Winnipeg and grew up in the CFS system, grew up in the education system, and certainly never saw themselves reflected in anything in those systems. Like, I never had a First Nations teacher. I never had a First Nations or Métis or Inuit social worker or a worker that worked with me. Certainly we're now seeing, a resurgence of, people within the justice system that are working, that are lawyers, that are doctors, that are politicians. And now, a premier-elect, we now see that, and, our future teacher or our future children can aspire to see that and see themselves reflected and be those future, maybe a prime minister in the future. So certainly a shift, and we want to see more of our people reflected in the workforce as well, and in those systems, and changing those systems that we see a lot of systemic racism in.
What else do you think will be a top priority for the Premier-elect? Would searching the landfill be one?
Absolutely. That has been one of the top things that we've been talking about. No one should ever have to, call the landfill their final resting place. I get super emotional about this because people know that I have a sister who's missing, and I've never been able to visit the landfill, even when Tanya Nipanak's family was there. It's just atrocious that someone would even do something like that. Our family, when Tina Fontaine's body was, discovered in the Red River, our family, along with Kyle Kematch's family, stepped up and we started Drag the Red. We continue to do that every year. We do it 4 times a week.
Many people have said Wab Kinew's win is a step in reconciliation. Will his leadership continue to help push for change?
Absolutely, it would. It will. I was apprehensive, of course, as an Indigenous person, and we certainly saw what in the government in past, the past 7 years, what reconciliation looked like with this government, right? We've heard the word, used, and action, of course, meant, going to that ballot box and voting for change. And we certainly seen this province go to the ballot box and show us what reconciliation actually means. And, this government under Wab Kinew's premiership is ready to get to work and actually show what reconciliation means. And that actually means getting to work and getting people housed and off the street and living in dignity and not living in bus shelters, making sure people have access to addiction supports, making sure that, people aren't living in the landfills. Like we said, that those actually are, those families are searched for, that those loved ones know that that's not going to be their loved one's final resting place, that there are supports going to be put in place. And that's what they've been doing, camping out, advocating, not only here, but across Canada. And every other province has been doing it too, supporting those families and those calls right across Canada. And I just want to shout out all those families that have been doing that and supporting those calls, because it takes, all of us to do that, and all of Canada. And that's what it's going to take for this to end. It's a human issue. It's not just an Indigenous issue. It's a human issue. And this is human life. And we all need to care about it. And that's actually what this election was all about. All of us coming together to support one another. And, I just want to say to all Manitobans that, we came together in this election. And I'm so, so proud of all of us that where we are today in history. We have the first First Nation Premier-elect, and we are going to do some amazing work together and bringing our province together as a whole.
Okay, Miigwech, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of Nation to Nation, and if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. Miigwech, and have a good night.